What if I told you that the life you spent 36 years meticulously designing could be demolished in under a minute? I was the architect of my own existence, a controlled, minimalist structure with clean lines and zero tolerance for chaos. My career was my foundation, my ambition the steel frame. There was no room for the unpredictable mess of a family. Or so I believed. It's funny how quickly a fortress can become a ruin. The laser pointer was a cool, steady weight in my hand, its red dot tracing the future of Seattle's waterfront. On the screen, the culmination of an 18-month project glowed, the Oak Haven Park redevelopment. It was more than a park. It was a symphony of native flora, sustainable water features, and serene public spaces. My masterpiece. The clients, a panel of stern-faced city developers, were finally smiling. I had them. Victory tasted like the overpriced bottled water sitting untouched on the conference table. My phone, set to silent, vibrated against the polished mahogany, a low, insistent hum. I ignored it. My one rule during a client pitch: no distractions. The world outside this room did not exist. But then it vibrated again, and again. I shot a subtle, irritated glance toward the glass door. My assistant, Mark, stood there, his face pale, his eyes wide with an apology and something else, something like fear. This was not part of the plan. He broke protocol, slipping inside and placing a small folded note beside my laptop. It read, "It's your father. He says it's an emergency." An emergency? My parents' definition of an emergency was usually a plumbing issue or a sale at the local hardware store. Annoyance warred with a flicker of unease. I gave the clients my most confident smile. "Excuse me for just one moment. A quick clarification I must attend to." They nodded, still basking in the glow of the virtual park. I stepped into the hushed hallway, the heavy door clicking shut behind me, sealing off my perfect, orderly world. I pressed the phone to my ear. "Dad? I'm in the middle of a major presentation. Is everything okay?" The silence on the other end was a gaping void. Then, a sound I hadn't heard since my grandfather's funeral over a decade ago. My father, the stoic pillar of our family, trying and failing to swallow a sob. His voice was a ragged whisper. "Tessa, it's Chloe." My blood ran cold. Chloe was the chaos to my order, the whirlwind to my stillness. She was supposed to be in South America, chasing waterfalls with her camera, living the life I'd consciously rejected. There was an accident. A car. On a mountain road. Each word was a stone dropped into a deep well, the ripples spreading through my body, paralyzing me. He didn't have to say the rest. I knew. The world tilted, the clean architectural lines of my office hallway blurring into a meaningless smear. The presentation, the clients, the park, it all evaporated. It was meaningless dust. My mind, usually a fortress of logic, became a screaming cavern of denial. Not Chloe. Not my untamable, vibrant, infuriating sister. She was the one who was supposed to outlive us all, fueled by sheer, reckless passion. I couldn't breathe. My hand gripped the cool steel of the door handle, anchoring me to a reality I no longer recognized. Through the fog, I could hear my father's broken voice continuing, saying things about arrangements, about flights, about the unspeakable logistics of death. I couldn't process it. My mind was stuck on the last postcard she sent me, a picture of a ridiculously fluffy alpaca. Then, as I was about to disconnect, to collapse under the sheer weight of it, his final words cut through the static. They were the words that would become my sentence. "Tessa, listen. In the will, Chloe's will, she named you. You're named as Riley's guardian. Have you ever flown toward a life you never wanted? The hum of the jet engine was a monotonous drone, a soundtrack for the slideshow of memories flashing through my mind. Chloe laughing, with paint in her hair. Chloe scaling a rock face, her body a fearless silhouette against the sun. Chloe, at 14, convincing me to sneak out and see a terrible band in a smoky bar. Each memory was a fresh stab of pain. Beneath the grief, a cold, heavy dread was settling in my stomach. It wasn't just about losing my sister. It was about what I was inheriting. A 16-year-old girl. A life I had meticulously built myself to avoid. The flight from Seattle to Boise is short, just over an hour, but it felt like a descent into another dimension. The moment I stepped off the plane, the air changed. It was the dry, sage-scented air of my childhood in Idaho, a smell I associated with suffocating summers and the desperate urge to escape. My father was waiting for me at the gate, his face a roadmap of sleepless nights. Our hug was stiff, the embrace of two people who had forgotten how to comfort each other. The drive to their small town was a blur of familiar, flat landscapes, the silence in the car broken only by his occasional, hollow cough. The house was exactly as I remembered it, a time capsule of floral wallpaper and oak furniture. But now, a funereal hush had fallen over it. Neighbors and distant relatives drifted through the living room like ghosts, their murmurs of, "So sorry for your loss," blending into a meaningless hum. My mother, her eyes red and swollen, was playing the role of the gracious hostess, pressing plates of food into people's hands with a mechanical desperation. I felt like a foreigner here, an intruder in their ritual of grief. My world was steel and glass, theirs was casseroles and quiet weeping. I scanned the room for a flash of purple hair, but she wasn't there. "Where's Riley?" I asked my mother, my voice barely a whisper. She sighed, her shoulders slumping. "In her room. Chloe's old room. She won't come out." I excused myself from the suffocating sympathy of the living room and walked down the hallway, each step echoing on the worn hardwood floors. The door was closed. For a moment, I just stood there, my hand hovering over the brass knob. What do you say to a child whose world has just ended? A child who is now, impossibly, your responsibility. I pushed the door open. The room was a chaotic shrine to my sister. Travel photographs were taped to the walls, colorful textiles were draped over the furniture, and in the middle of it all was Riley. She was sitting on the floor, surrounded by a mess of art supplies and clothes, headphones clamped over her ears. She was no longer the sweet, gangly kid with braces I remembered from a Christmas 2 years ago. This was a stranger. Her hair was a defiant shade of violet. A silver ring pierced her nostril, and her eyes, when she finally looked up and saw me, were arctic cold. I tried for a gentle tone, the one I used on nervous clients. "Riley, I'm so sorry." She pulled one headphone off, the music leaking out as a tinny, aggressive beat. Her eyes, the same impossible blue as Chloe's, scanned me from head to toe with a look of undisguised contempt. It was a look that said, "What are you doing here?" She didn't say a word. The silence stretched, filled only by the thumping of the music from her headphone. She was a fortress, and I had no idea how to get inside. "How are you holding up?" I asked, the words feeling stupid and hollow as soon as they left my mouth. She gave a short, bitter laugh. "Just fantastic. My mom's dead, but I have a geometry test on Friday, so there's that to look forward to." Her sarcasm was a weapon, each word a carefully aimed dart. She was Chloe's daughter, all right. My sister had wielded that same brand of sharp-edged humor to keep the world at bay. But this wasn't humor. It was pure, unadulterated rage. I took a step into the room, my polished city shoes looking ridiculous on the faded floral rug. "Your grandparents are worried about you." I tried again, shifting tactics. She finally looked directly at me, her gaze unwavering. "And you?" Are you worried about me, Tessa? Or are you just worried about what you're supposed to do with me? The question hit me like a physical blow. It was the truth, or at least a shard of it. I was a problem solver, an architect, and right now she was the most complex, unsolvable problem I had ever faced. She saw right through my awkward attempts at sympathy to the terror underneath. I had no answer. I was her aunt. And I was a complete and utter stranger. Have you ever been handed the perfect, logical, loving way out of a nightmare, only to realize it's the most dangerous trap of all? The funeral was over. The last of the sympathetic neighbors had departed, leaving behind a Jell-O salad and a suffocating silence. The air in my parents' house, thick with the scent of wilting lilies and my mother's pot roast, felt heavier than grief. It felt like judgment. My parents moved through the rooms with a quiet, devastating purpose, tidying away the evidence of the day, preparing the stage for what was to come. My father cleared his throat from the doorway of the living room, the room where all family edicts were handed down. Tessa, Riley, could you join us for a moment? We need to talk. It wasn't a request. We were being summoned. I followed him, my footsteps feeling loud and intrusive on the familiar carpet. Riley trailed behind me, a silent shadow of teenage angst, and slumped into an armchair, immediately absorbed by her phone screen. My parents sat together on the floral sofa, a united front. I sat opposite them, feeling like I was 16 again, about to be lectured for a bad report card. My mother began, her voice a carefully calibrated instrument of gentle reason. Honey, we know this has been a terrible shock for everyone. She reached over and patted my father's hand. Your father and I have been talking, and we've come to a decision. We want to do what's best for Riley, what will cause the least amount of disruption in her life. She looked at her granddaughter, who didn't look up. The air crackled with unspoken words. Why did their solution feel like a verdict before the trial had even begun? It's obvious, really, my father continued, picking up the thread of their rehearsed speech. Riley will stay here with us. This is her home. Her friends are here. Her school. To uproot her now, to take her to a big city where she knows no one, it would be cruel. We have the space, the time. It's the only thing that makes sense. He laid it all out, a neat, logical argument. It was a perfect plan, designed to solve a problem. The problem, I was beginning to realize, was me. Then my mother addressed the elephant in the room. She waved a dismissive hand as if shooing a fly. We know what Chloe wrote in her will, but you know your sister. She was a wonderful, free spirit, but she didn't always think things through. It was an emotional gesture, not a practical plan. And there it was. My sister's final, most important wish, brushed aside like a piece of sentimental foolishness. I could feel a cold anger starting to build in my chest, a feeling I hadn't felt in this house for nearly 20 years. It wasn't just about Chloe, was it? In their eyes, I was just a more successful, more organized version of my reckless sister. They saw my life in Seattle, my career, my apartment, my independence, not as an achievement, but as a fundamental incompatibility with the concept of family. Every choice I had ever made that deviated from their path was a mark against me. They weren't trying to protect Riley from me. They were trying to protect her from becoming me, or worse, from becoming Chloe all over again. My father turned his gaze on me, his expression a mixture of pity and pride. And you, Tessa. Look at the life you've built. Your career is taking off. It's magnificent. But you're not a mother. You're a busy, single woman in a demanding job. It wouldn't be fair to you to have this responsibility thrust upon you. He said responsibility, like it was a terminal illness. My life's work, my hard-won success, was being presented as my greatest disqualification. They were praising me and condemning me in the same breath. Throughout all of this, Riley hadn't moved. She hadn't made a sound. She was staring at her phone, her thumb scrolling endlessly, a perfect statue of indifference. Was she even listening? Did she want this easy way out? To stay in her familiar world? To be raised by her loving, predictable grandparents? Her silence was a vacuum, pulling all the energy from the room. It made me feel completely, terrifyingly alone. I had no ally here. I was facing my parents and my own deepest fears by myself. My mother smiled, a soft, final smile that signaled the end of the discussion. It was the same smile she'd given me when she told me my dream of going to art school was unrealistic. "So, it's settled then," she said, her voice bright with relief. "Riley will stay with us. It's for the best." It wasn't a proposal. It was a pronouncement. They had solved the problem, and now they sat back, waiting for me to thank them for lifting this terrible burden from my shoulders. They were waiting for my surrender. What is the real difference between a last will and a weapon? I used to think one was about legacy and the other about destruction. I was about to find out they could be the same thing. 2 days after the funeral, 2 days after my parents had so neatly decided my future and Riley's for me, I drove their decade-old sedan into Boise. The purpose of my trip was a meeting with a man I'd never met, Chloe's lawyer. I felt like a ghost, going through the motions of a life that no longer felt like mine. Surrender felt easy, logical. It was the architect in me craving a clean solution. The lawyer's office was a sanctuary of quiet professionalism. Dark wood paneling, the scent of old books and leather, a sense of gravitas that was a world away from my parents' floral, emotionally charged home. The man who greeted me, a Mr. Henderson, was in his late 50s with kind, tired eyes. He spoke in the calm, measured tones of someone long accustomed to navigating the wreckage of other people's lives. He offered me coffee, which I declined. I wanted this to be over. I just wanted the paperwork, the legal confirmation of the burden Chloe had left me. Mr. Henderson slid a thick manila folder across his polished desk. "This is a copy of your sister's will. It's quite straightforward. A few personal effects, her photography equipment, and her savings are to be held in trust for Riley. And, as you know, the final article names you as sole legal guardian." He paused, letting the words hang in the still air. I nodded, a knot tightening in my stomach. I felt the weight of my parents' decision pressing down on me, the simple logic of their plan. I was about to open my mouth, to tell him there might be a change, a family arrangement. "But before we get into the legal specifics," he said, cutting off my unspoken surrender, "Chloe left something else for you, specifically for you, to be given to you in person." He opened a drawer and pulled out a simple cream-colored envelope. My name was written on the front in Chloe's familiar, chaotic scrawl. My breath caught in my throat. It was a message from the dead. It was a final conversation I never thought I'd have. My hands trembled slightly as I took it from him. It felt heavier than a piece of paper. It felt like it contained the weight of a life. He must have seen the look on my face. "Would you like a moment alone?" he asked gently. I just nodded, unable to speak. He slipped out of the room, closing the heavy door behind him, leaving me with my sister's last words. For a full minute, I just stared at the envelope. What could she possibly have written that would change anything? What justification could she offer for turning my entire world upside down? Part of me didn't want to open it. It was easier to believe my parents, to believe Chloe had been thoughtless, whimsical. It was easier than facing the truth. Finally, I slid my finger under the flap and broke the seal. The letter was written on a single sheet of hotel stationery from somewhere in Peru. "Tessa," it began. If you're reading this, then I'm gone. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for the pain this will cause you. But I need you to do one last thing for me. The most important thing. I need you to save my daughter. Save her? From what? From her loving grandparents? The words felt overly dramatic, so typically Chloe. But as I kept reading, a cold, hard clarity began to settle over me. I know what Mom and Dad are going to do, she wrote. I know they're going to tell you it's for the best if Riley stays with them. They'll say they have the time, the experience. They'll tell you that your life is too important to be disrupted. Don't listen to them. They will love her, Tessa. They will love her so much they will smother her. They'll try to sand down all her rough edges, prune all her wild branches, and turn her into a nice, sensible girl who fits into their world. They will try to make her into the daughter they wished I had been. They will try to make her into you. That line hit me like a punch to the gut. She saw it. She saw the cage they had built, the one I had fought my entire adult life to escape. The letter continued, her words a torrent of love and desperation. They'll do it out of love, but it will kill her spirit, just like it almost killed mine. You're the only one who can stop them. You, Tessa, are the only one who can give her the freedom to be who she is meant to be, because you are the only one in our family who ever had the guts to fight for that freedom for yourself. It's why I always admired you, even when we were fighting. You built your own life. Please, build one for her too. The legal document on the table was just paper and ink. This letter, was the real will. This was her final wish, her last request, her legacy. It wasn't a burden she was placing on me out of thoughtlessness. It was the ultimate act of trust. She hadn't chosen me because she thought I was a ready-made mother. She had chosen me because she knew I was a survivor. My carefully constructed life wasn't a disqualification. It was the entire reason I was qualified. A quiet, fierce resolve solidified inside me, displacing all the doubt and fear. This was no longer about duty. It was about a promise. I folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and knew, with absolute certainty, that the family verdict had just been overturned. The battle was just beginning. How do you tell the people who gave you life that their love is a cage? The letter from Chloe was no longer just paper. It was a shield in one hand and a mandate in the other. I drove back from the lawyer's office not with the weight of a burden, but with the sharp, clear purpose of a soldier given their orders. The surrender I had been contemplating an hour earlier now seemed like a profound betrayal. I rehearsed my opening lines the entire way home, designing my argument like I would a blueprint, clean, logical, and structurally sound. I was a fool to think a family crisis could be handled with logic. I found them in the kitchen, the heart of their home, sipping coffee and looking, for the first time in days, at peace. They had solved the problem. They had contained the chaos. They smiled when I walked in, the relieved smiles of parents whose difficult child has finally seen reason. That smile, so full of loving condescension, was the spark that lit the fuse. I stood at the counter, placing my car keys down with a deliberate click that echoed in the quiet room. I'm going to follow Chloe's will, I announced. My voice was calm, measured, completely at odds with the frantic beating of my heart. For a moment, there was only the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. My father frowned, as if he'd misheard me. "What are you talking about, Tessa?" my mother asked, her smile faltering. "We've already discussed this. It's all settled." "No," I said, my gaze steady. "You discussed it. You settled it. I've made my own decision. I'm honoring my sister's last wish. I'm taking Riley back to Seattle with me." The word Seattle hung in the air like a declaration of war. It was the symbol of everything they thought was wrong with me, the city where I'd built a life that didn't include them. The peace in the room shattered. Absolutely not, my father said, his voice dropping to the low, authoritative tone that had terrified me as a child. We will not allow it. My mother's voice, in contrast, rose, becoming thin and sharp with disbelief and hurt. How can you be so selfish? After everything we've been through, you want to tear this family apart even more? You want to steal our granddaughter from us? The accusation of selfishness was their first and most powerful weapon. It was designed to make me feel guilt, to make me question my own motives. Was this selfish? Or was it the most selfless thing I'd ever been asked to do? Chloe's words echoed in my head, my shield. This isn't about me, and it's not about you, I said, struggling to keep the anger out of my voice. This is about what Chloe wanted for her daughter. Chloe was an artist, my mother cried, as if that explained everything. She was impulsive. She wrote some sentimental note, and you're going to treat it like gospel? We are her grandparents. We can offer her stability, a real home. It was then that Riley appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. She leaned against the frame, arms crossed, her expression a blank mask of teenage boredom. She was a spectator at her own trial. My father stood up, his presence filling the room. He pointed a finger at me, his face flushed with anger. What can you offer her, Tessa? A sterile, empty apartment? A life scheduled around your client meetings? You're a career woman. You're single. You have no children. You don't know the first thing about raising a teenager, let alone a grieving one. Every word was a hammer blow, aimed at the foundations of the life I was so proud of. They were using my success, my independence, my very identity as proof of my unsuitability. The life I had fought to build was being used to declare me unfit. I'll figure it out, I said, my voice trembling slightly. For the first time, a sliver of doubt pierced my resolve. Could I do this? That's not good enough for our granddaughter, my father shot back. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a low, threatening growl. I'm warning you, Tessa. If you try to take that girl out of this house, we will fight you. We will contest the guardianship in court. We will tell the judge exactly why a single, career-obsessed woman who hasn't been home for Christmas in 5 years is not a suitable guardian. We will do whatever it takes. The battle lines had been drawn. This was no longer just a disagreement. This was war. And my own parents had just become my sworn enemies. What's the breaking point for a person who prides herself on being unbreakable? I had designed my apartment the way I designed my life, as a testament to control. It was a minimalist sanctuary of polished concrete floors, monochromatic furniture, and curated emptiness, a fortress of solitude high above the Seattle noise. I never imagined I would willingly open the gates to a Trojan horse with purple hair and a suitcase full of chaos. The moment Riley stepped inside, my world tilted on its axis. Her combat boots left scuff marks on the floor, and her very presence, vibrant and angry, felt like a splash of graffiti on a pristine white wall. The first few days were a cold war fought over territory. My territory. The battle began with sound, a guttural, thrashing music that vibrated through the walls of my serene home office, shattering my concentration. Riley, the rule is headphones if I'm working, I'd say, my voice tight with forced calm. She would just look at me, a flicker of defiance in her eyes, before slowly, grudgingly, turning the volume down a fraction of a decibel. It was a constant negotiation I was always losing. Every day was a fresh assault, a new boundary tested and breached. Then came the physical invasion. Clothes were shed like a second skin and left in piles on the floor. Empty glasses, sticky with soda, materialized on my custom-built walnut bookshelves. Her art supplies, charcoal sticks, tubes of paint, jars of murky water. Spread across the dining table I used for client blueprints, a chaotic, colorful stain on my orderly existence. My home, once a reflection of my mind, was now a reflection of my failure. It was messy, unpredictable, and completely out of my control. And I was beginning to think I hated it. The conversations were minefields of sarcasm and silence. I would try to establish structure, to create a plan. "We need to get you registered for school tomorrow. I've made an appointment at 9. She would shrug, her eyes glued to her phone. Whatever. Every attempt I made to connect, to build some kind of bridge across the chasm of her grief and my inexperience, was met with a wall of teenage apathy. She wasn't just fighting me, she was fighting the fact that I existed, a constant reminder of the mother she had lost. The breaking point came on a Tuesday, exactly 2 weeks after her arrival. I received an automated call from her new school. Riley had been marked absent from all her classes. I felt a surge of cold, white-hot fury. I was a 36-year-old woman, a respected professional who managed million-dollar projects, and I was being outmaneuvered by a 16-year-old. When she finally sauntered in hours later, smelling of rain and attitude, I confronted her. "Where were you today, Riley?" She just shrugged, dropping her wet backpack on the white leather sofa. "Out." "Out where?" "The school called." "You skipped every single class." "Wow," she said, her voice dripping with mock admiration. "The detective work is stunning." I felt the carefully constructed walls of my patience begin to crumble. "This isn't a joke. This is your life. Your future." "You know what's a joke?" She snapped back, her eyes finally flashing with something other than indifference. "You pretending to care about my future. You don't want me here. You just got stuck with me." Her words struck a raw nerve because they held a sliver of the truth I was terrified to admit. That night, long after the angry music from her room had finally died down, I sat in my perfect living room, now littered with the debris of our shared life. I stared out at the glittering, indifferent lights of the city. My parents' voices echoed in my head, a chorus of, "I told you so." "You're not a mother. You're not equipped for this. You're in over your head." For the first time since reading Chloe's letter, I allowed myself to ask the question, had I made a terrible, life-altering mistake? In trying to honor my sister's wish, was I failing the very person I had promised to save? I felt completely and utterly alone, trapped in a life I had never wanted, with a stranger I didn't know how to reach. Have you ever had to admit that your greatest strength is your most profound weakness? My entire life was built on the principle of deconstruction and design. I could look at a barren plot of land and see a park. I could analyze a complex problem and engineer an elegant solution. But I couldn't solve Riley. The day after our fight, I found the business card the school had given me during registration, a lifeline I had been too proud to use. It belonged to a Dr. Anya Sharma, the school psychologist. Making that call felt like the biggest failure of my life. It was an admission of absolute defeat. Dr. Sharma's office was not what I expected. There were no Freudian couches or abstract art. It was a small, bright room with comfortable chairs and shelves overflowing with books. Not just textbooks, but novels and graphic novels. She was a woman in her 40s, with a calm, intelligent face and a way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. I sat across from her, the architect presenting the details of a failing structure, laying out the facts. The mess, the truancy, the defiant silence, the sarcastic outbursts. I was describing the symptoms of a problem I needed her to fix. When I finished, my story hanging in the quiet air between us, she didn't offer immediate solutions or platitudes. She just nodded slowly, her gaze thoughtful. "It sounds exhausting," she said, and the simple empathy in her voice almost made me cry. Tessa, you're an architect. You see a problem and you want to build a structure to contain it, a set of rules to govern it. But Riley isn't a project. She's a survivor of a demolition. The metaphor was so precise, so painfully accurate, that it took my breath away. That's exactly what I had been doing, trying to build a new life for her before the rubble of the old one had even been cleared. I must have looked lost, because she leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle but firm. Let me offer a different perspective. What if I told you Riley isn't fighting you? I frowned. It certainly feels like she is. I'm sure it does, Dr. Sharma agreed. But she isn't fighting you, Tessa. She is fighting a world that suddenly, violently, took her mother away. She is fighting the terrifying reality that the people she loves can just vanish. And in her mind, her mother abandoned her. So now she is testing you. She is pushing every single one of your buttons, creating chaos, daring you to do the one thing she is most terrified of. She paused, letting the words sink in. She is waiting for you to abandon her too. The thought was a revelation, a sudden blinding flash of light that reconfigured everything I thought I knew. Every slammed door, every sarcastic comment, every broken rule. It wasn't a declaration of war against me. It was a desperate, terrified question. Are you going to leave me too? The anger and frustration I'd been feeling for weeks began to dissolve, replaced by a wave of profound, aching sadness, both for Riley and for my own blindness. I had been seeing a rebellious teenager, not a terrified child lashing out in pain. What do? I asked, the words barely a whisper. My own blueprints were useless. I needed a new set of plans. You stop trying to control her, Dr. Sharma said, and you start trying to understand her. You don't have to fix her grief, you just have to sit with her in it. Instead of asking where she was, try saying, I was worried when I didn't hear from you. You're not punishing the behavior, you're acknowledging the connection. She gave me a few more practical, simple tools, small shifts in language that felt both alien and incredibly logical. She suggested we try a few joint sessions if Riley was willing. I left her office feeling like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. The problem hadn't been solved, not by a long shot. But for the first time, I felt like I was looking at the right problem. The chaos in my apartment was no longer a personal affront. It was the external manifestation of the storm inside a 16-year-old girl. I didn't feel like a failed guardian anymore. I felt like someone who had just been handed the correct set of blueprints for the most important project of her life. The despair was gone, replaced by a fragile, terrifying, and utterly necessary flicker of hope. What if the most dangerous weapon ever used against you was your own past? My session with Dr. Sharma had given me a new lens, a new language for this impossible situation. For a few fragile days, I tried to use it. I stopped asking Riley about school and started asking about the song she was listening to. I didn't comment on the mess. I just made 2 cups of tea and left one outside her bedroom door. There were no breakthroughs, no tearful confessions, but the tension in the apartment had eased from a razor's edge to a dull hum. It was a start. It was hope. And I should have known it was the calm before the storm. The first blow arrived on a crisp Friday afternoon, delivered by a mail carrier who had no idea he was handing me a declaration of war. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope, rigid with formal importance, bearing the embossed letterhead of a Boise law firm. My hands went cold as I held it. This wasn't a chatty letter from my mother. This was an official act of aggression. I sliced it open with a kitchen knife, my movements precise and slow, a stark contrast to the frantic pounding in my chest. The fragile peace of the last few days evaporated like mist in the sun. The letter was 2 pages of dense, impenetrable legalese. But the meaning was brutally clear. It was a formal notification of their intent to file for custody of Riley, citing me as an unsuitable guardian due to my demanding career, lack of parental experience, and inability to provide a stable, traditional family environment. Each phrase was a carefully chosen stone, hurled from 300 miles away. This wasn't a desperate plea from loving grandparents. This was a calculated, strategic assault designed by a lawyer. They were trying to break me with paperwork. As if on cue, my phone rang. The caller ID read, "Dad." I knew this was the second wave of the attack, the personal follow-up to the legal barrage. I stepped out onto my small balcony, the cool Seattle air a shock to my system, and answered. "I got the letter," I said, my voice flat. "I assume you did," he replied, his tone devoid of anger. It was something far worse, a calm, righteous certainty. "I'm calling to give you one last chance to be reasonable, Tessa, to avoid making this ugly for everyone. Sign the papers they sent. Let Riley come home." "This is her home now," I said, the words tasting like ash. "No," he said, his voice hardening slightly. "It's your apartment. It's not a home. And if you refuse to see that, we'll have to make the court see it for us." There was a pause, a moment for the threat to land. And then he delivered the killing blow, the one that proved Chloe's letter had been a prophecy. "We don't want to do this," he said, the lie catching in his throat. "But you leave us no choice. We will have to discuss your history, your time in college." My breath hitched. The world seemed to shrink to the size of the phone pressed against my ear. He was talking about the 6 months of my sophomore year when my world had collapsed into a gray, suffocating fog. The semester I'd withdrawn, the therapy sessions, the antidepressants. A period of my life I had fought so hard to overcome, a vulnerability I had shared with my family in confidence. "We'll have to explain to the judge that you have a history of instability," he continued, the feigned reluctance in his voice making it 1,000 times more cruel. "We have to do what's best for Riley." In that moment, something inside me shattered. It wasn't just the threat, it was the betrayal. He was taking my darkest, most painful moment and twisting it into a weapon. My own father was willing to brand me as mentally unstable, to publicly shame me, all to win. He wasn't trying to save Riley. He was trying to prove that he was right, that my independent life was a mistake, that I was, and always had been, fundamentally broken. The love I had for him, complicated and strained as it was, curdled into something cold and hard. The despair I felt was profound, a black wave threatening to pull me under. They knew my weakness. They had created it, in a way, with the same suffocating pressure they now wanted to inflict on Riley. And they were going to use it to destroy me. But as I stood there, shivering on the balcony, the pain began to transmute. It forged itself into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. They thought they had found my breaking point. They had no idea they had just shown me exactly what I was fighting for. This was no longer just about Chloe's wish. This was about my own survival. "I'll see you in court," I said, and ended the call. How do you fight an enemy who knows the location of every old wound you carry? I hung up the phone, but my hand remained frozen, gripping the cold metal and glass as if it were a block of ice. My father's words didn't just echo in my ears, they resonated deep inside me, in a place I thought I had sealed off and rebuilt years ago. He wasn't just threatening a court battle, he was threatening to excavate my past and put my scars on public display. The cold resolve I had felt for a fleeting moment fractured, and the full weight of his betrayal crashed down on me. I walked back into the living room, my movements stiff and robotic. The sleek, minimalist lines of my apartment, usually a source of comfort and order, now felt like the bars of a cage. The walls were closing in. I sank onto the white leather sofa, the same one Riley had dropped her wet backpack on, and stared blankly at the far wall. The legal letter lay on the coffee table, a venomous white rectangle. My professional life was about to be twisted into a caricature of selfish ambition. My personal history was about to become a weapon against me. And the most painful part? It was all being orchestrated by the two people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I thought of Chloe. I thought of her trust, her desperate plea in that letter. You are the only one who ever had the guts to fight. Did I still have that fight in me? Or had I just led her daughter into a war I was destined to lose? My parents had the home, the stability, the perfect narrative of the loving, conventional family. I had a sterile apartment and a history of instability. My own father had given them the exact word to use. I dropped my head into my hands, the polished concrete floor seeming to swim beneath my feet. The silence in the apartment was absolute, a crushing weight that amplified the screaming in my own head. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed by the sheer calculated cruelty of it all. The sun began to set, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. I didn't move. I was so lost in my own despair that I didn't hear the soft footsteps approaching. I only registered another presence when a gentle clink of ceramic on wood broke the silence. I looked up. Riley was standing by the coffee table. She had placed a steaming mug beside the legal letter, a silent offering. Her face was unreadable, the usual mask of sullen indifference firmly in place. But her eyes, for the first time, they weren't looking at me with hostility. They were just looking. She didn't retreat to her room as I expected. She hesitated, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, as if debating whether to speak. The silence stretched, but it was different now. It wasn't empty. It was filled with a fragile, unspoken question. I wrapped my cold hands around the warmth of the mug. It was tea. Chamomile, I thought, from the faint, sweet scent. She had made me tea. This small, simple act of care was so unexpected, so completely out of character, that it felt more profound than any apology. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet, almost a whisper, directed at the floor. Mom used to say they never really understood her. All her art, her traveling, they just saw it as running away. She looked up then, her gaze meeting mine directly for the first time without a shield of sarcasm. I guess they don't understand you either. And with those few words, the entire dynamic of our world shifted. She wasn't my enemy. She wasn't my burden. In that moment, she was the only person on the planet who saw what was really happening. She saw me, the ice that had formed around my heart, and the thicker ice that had existed between us for weeks, began to crack. We weren't aunt and niece. We were survivors, trapped on the same side of a war we hadn't asked for. What happens when your greatest liability becomes your only ally? The morning after my father's threat, the apartment felt different. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by a quiet hum of shared space. Riley's music was still playing from her room, but it no longer felt like an assault. It was just a soundtrack. When I went to make coffee, I found she had already made a full pot. We didn't talk about the phone call, or the letter, or the unspoken truce her cup of tea had offered. We didn't have to. The war with each other was over. The real war was about to begin, and for the first time, I wasn't fighting it alone. That morning, I didn't wake up to a problem. I woke up to a project. My first call wasn't to my parents to plead or argue. It was to the sharpest family law attorney my professional network could recommend. Her name was Evelyn Reed, and her voice over the phone was like steel wrapped in velvet. I laid out the facts, the will, the letter from my parents' lawyer, the veiled threat about my past. She listened without interruption. "They're going to paint you as the unstable, career-obsessed outsider," she stated, not as a question, but as a fact. Our job is to prove that you are the only one who truly understands what your sister wanted. When I told Riley I had hired a lawyer, she just nodded, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Good, she said. What do we do now? The we was everything. It was the foundation for our new reality. Evelyn had been clear. We needed to demonstrate the strength of the bond between Chloe and me, to counteract their narrative of the distant, absent sister. We need proof, I told Riley. Photos, letters, emails, anything that shows Chloe and I were close, that she trusted me. Riley snorted. If you want to find proof Mom trusted you, you can't look in a filing cabinet. You have to look in the chaos. She led me to the 2 large trunks she had brought from Idaho, her mother's entire life packed into 2 worn, leather-bound boxes. For hours, we sat on the floor of my minimalist living room, surrounded by a lifetime of beautiful, disorganized memories. It was an archaeological dig into my sister's soul. Riley, as the expert curator, navigated the layers of photographs, concert tickets, and travel journals. It was in a dusty shoebox that we found it, a stack of old letters, tied with a faded ribbon, that I had written to Chloe during my first year of college, the year I had fallen apart. I watched, my heart pounding, as Riley read one of them. I remembered writing it, the words filled with a loneliness and confusion I thought I had buried forever. After a moment, she looked up at me, her eyes wide with a new kind of understanding. She kept these, Riley whispered, as if in awe. She told me once that you were the strongest person she knew because you had to build your own life from scratch. My parents were going to use my past to prove I was unstable. My sister had saved the proof that it had made me strong. We had found our weapon. Our joint therapy sessions with Dr. Sharma became strategy meetings for the soul. Riley, once a sullen statue of silence, began to talk. She talked about her mom, not just the loss, but the funny, infuriating, brilliant person she had been. And I talked about my sister. We were building a bridge of shared memories, right there in that quiet office. In our 3rd session, Riley looked at Dr. Sharma and said, "My grandparents want to turn me into someone my mom would have hated. Tessa is the only one who wants me to be me." It was the simplest, most powerful testimony imaginable. One evening, I was hunched over my drafting table, wrestling with a design for a community garden that felt stiff and lifeless. Riley came and stood beside me, watching in silence. After a moment, she picked up a charcoal pencil. "It's too perfect," she said quietly. "Gardens are supposed to be a little wild." She began to sketch on a fresh sheet of paper, her hand moving with an effortless grace that was so much like Chloe's. She kept my clean, modern lines for the structure, but inside them, she drew a riot of flowing, overlapping plants, a beautiful, untamed chaos. It was brilliant. It was a perfect fusion of my order and her mother's spirit. It was us. We looked at the drawing, this thing we had created together, and I knew. We weren't just a guardian and a ward. We were a family. Let them come. We were ready. Have you ever sat in a room where the entire story of your life is told by a stranger who is being paid to destroy you? The courtroom was a sterile, impersonal box of polished wood and muted light, a place completely at odds with the raw, messy business of a family tearing itself apart. I sat beside my lawyer, Evelyn, with Riley on my other side, a still point of defiant calm in her black hoodie. Across the aisle, my parents sat with their attorney, looking like worried strangers I might pass on the street. They wouldn't meet my eyes. The battle had finally been moved to neutral ground, and I wasn't sure if that made it better or worse. Their lawyer, a man named Davies with a smooth, sympathetic voice, went first. He painted a masterful portrait of my parents as the bedrock of stability, the warm, loving heart of a small town, a port in the storm for their grieving granddaughter. He spoke of home-cooked meals, lifelong friends, and the comfort of the familiar. He was selling a Norman Rockwell painting, and I had to admit, it was a beautiful picture. It was the life I had run from, but in this cold, formal room, it sounded like a sanctuary. He made it sound like the only sane choice. Then, he turned his attention to me. The masterpiece of my life, the career I had built with my own two hands, was methodically deconstructed and presented as a monument to selfishness. He described my life in Seattle as a transient existence of client meetings and architectural drawings, a place devoid of warmth or family connection. He used my success as a weapon, twisting my ambition into a character flaw, my independence into an inability to care for another human being. I felt a hot flush of anger and shame creep up my neck, my own accomplishments being used as evidence against me. Finally, he deployed the weapon my father had handed him. He spoke of a documented history of emotional instability, referencing my difficult period in college with clinical detachment. He didn't need to shout. His quiet, concerned tone was far more damaging. He implied that I was a fragile, unpredictable variable, fundamentally unsuited for the immense pressure of raising a traumatized teen. I chanced to look at my father. He was staring at his hands, his knuckles white. He knew exactly what he had done. He had taken my deepest vulnerability and handed it to the enemy. When it was Evelyn's turn, she didn't try to match his emotional theatrics. She was calm, precise, an architect of facts. She presented Chloe's will, her letter to me, painting a different picture, one of a deep, abiding trust between two sisters who understood each other in a way their parents never could. She reframed my career not as selfishness, but as evidence of my resilience and strength. Ms. Hale didn't just find a life, she said, her voice clear and steady. She built one. That is the very strength her sister was counting on. The judge, a woman with intelligent, weary eyes, listened to it all with unwavering patience. When the lawyers were finished, a heavy silence fell over the room. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It felt like we were balanced on a knife's edge. Then the judge turned her gaze from the lawyers, from my parents, from me. She looked directly at the 16-year-old girl sitting beside me. "Riley," she said, her voice unexpectedly gentle. "I've heard what everyone thinks is best for you. Now, I'd like to hear from you. With whom do you want to live?" Riley stood up. She didn't look at me or her grandparents. She looked right at the judge, her posture straight, her voice clear and steady, without a hint of the sarcasm she usually wore like armor. "My grandparents are good people," she began, and I felt my stomach plummet. "They love me, but they want to love the me they can understand. They want to make me safe and predictable." She took a breath. "My mom she was art and chaos, and they spent her whole life trying to put her in a frame. They do the same thing to me, because they're scared of the parts of me that are just like her. Tessa doesn't try to fix me," she continued, and I finally allowed myself to breathe. "She gets that I'm a mess right now. She doesn't try to paint over it. She's the only one who respects the memory of my mom enough not to try and turn me into someone else." Her words, so simple and so profoundly true, landed with the force of a verdict. There was nothing more to say. The judge looked at my parents, then at me. A small, almost imperceptible nod. "The guardianship as stipulated in Chloe Hale's will is hereby affirmed," she said, the words cutting through the tension. The sound of her gavel was the quietest, most definitive explosion I had ever heard. We had won. Did you know that the moments that truly define your life aren't the loud, explosive victories, but the deafening silences that follow? The drive home from the courthouse was a study in quiet. There were no triumphant shouts, no celebratory music. There was only the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers against a light Seattle drizzle and the low hum of the engine. Riley sat in the passenger seat, headphones on, but I knew she wasn't listening to music. She was using them as a shield, a barrier against a world that had demanded too much from her today. I just drove, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, the judge's final words echoing in the silence. Guardianship affirmed. We had won. So why did it feel like I had lost a limb? We walked into the apartment, our sanctuary, our battlefield, and now, officially, our home. The air inside was still and heavy with unspoken things. Riley dropped her backpack by the door, a small, tired gesture, and disappeared into her room without a word. I was left standing in the middle of my perfectly designed living room, the victor of a war I never wanted to fight. There was no elation, no surge of pride. There was only a profound, bone-deep exhaustion and the hollow ache of relief. I had saved Riley from my parents, but in doing so, I had severed the final frayed threads that connected me to them. The victory was a quiet, lonely thing. Hours later, darkness had settled over the city, its lights a cold, indifferent glitter outside my window. I couldn't focus on work. My blueprints felt like meaningless lines on a page. The image of my mother's face as the verdict was read, a crumpled mask of disbelief and pain, was seared into my mind. I had made a promise to my sister, and I had kept it. But the cost was a family, fractured and bleeding. I was replaying every argument, every accusation, when I noticed the light was still on under Riley's door. I got up, compelled by an instinct I was only just beginning to recognize, and walked down the hall. The door was slightly ajar. I peered inside, expecting to see her staring at a screen, escaping into some digital world. But she wasn't. She was sitting at her desk, hunched over her sketchbook, the lamp casting a warm circle of light around her. Her hand moved across the page with a focused intensity, the soft, rhythmic scratch of charcoal on paper the only sound. She was completely absorbed, not in destruction or anger, but in creation. It was the first time I had seen her look truly peaceful. She was her mother's daughter, finding solace not in words, but in lines and shapes. I must have made a sound because she looked up, her eyes not hostile or guarded, just aware. She didn't close the book or hide it. After a moment's hesitation, she tilted it towards me. I stepped into the room, my eyes adjusting to the drawing. It wasn't a portrait or some fantastical creature. It was a plan, a blueprint. She had sketched the small, neglected patch of land behind my apartment building, a space I had written off as a lost cause. But in her drawing, it was a sanctuary, with winding paths and carefully placed benches. It was a garden. I was thinking, she said, her voice quiet, her eyes dropping back to the page as if she were embarrassed by the hope in her own idea. It gets good sun in the afternoon. We could plant some things there. Mom's favorite flowers, peonies and wild delphiniums. She said it so simply, but the weight of the offer was immense. She wasn't just designing a garden, she was proposing a future, a place where we could make something beautiful grow from the scorched earth of our grief. I walked over to her desk, my heart swelling with an emotion I couldn't name, and picked up a pencil from her jar. "That's a brilliant idea," I said, my voice thick. "Let's make it our first joint project." What if losing complete control of your life was the only way to truly find it? A year ago, that question would have sent me into a panic. Now, I live in the answer. I'm sitting in the garden we built, a pocket of beautiful, intentional chaos tucked behind my orderly building. It's late August, and the air is thick with the scent of sun-baked earth and the last of the summer roses. The slate paths are clean and geometric. That was my contribution. But the flower beds they border are a riot of color and life, spilling over the edges in a way that defies containment. That was Riley. Chloe's peonies and wild delphiniums have long since faded, but in their place, a dozen other species jostle for sunlight in a glorious, untamed mess. Riley isn't here right now. She's out with friends. Her laughter echoing in the hallway as she left an hour ago, a sound that has replaced the angry, thumping music of our early days. Her mother's vintage 35mm camera, which she treats with a reverence that breaks my heart, was slung over her shoulder. She isn't just taking pictures of the world anymore, she's finding her place in it. The sullen stranger with purple hair has been replaced by a young woman with a quick, sarcastic wit and an artist's observant eyes. The change wasn't a sudden breakthrough. It was a slow, quiet bloom, like one of our stubborn perennials. The phone rang earlier. It was my mother. A year ago, a call from her would have been a prelude to an argument or a cold, disapproving silence. Today, she asked about the garden. I told her the dahlias were spectacular this year. I could almost hear her nodding, picturing the neat, orderly rows she would have planted. After a moment, she put my father on the line. His voice was still gruff, the sound of a man who doesn't know how to say, "I'm sorry." But the hard, angry edge was gone. "Heard you landed the waterfront project," he said. "Good work, Tessa." It wasn't an apology, but it was a bridge. A fragile, tentative structure we were all too afraid to test with too much weight. Later, clearing the dining table, a space that now serves as a rotating gallery for Riley's photographs and my blueprints, I found a small stack of her mail. Tucked beneath a catalog for a camera supply store was a thick, important-looking envelope from a university. My heart did a familiar, protective clench. I expected it to be an application for art school, a path so similar to Chloe's it would have worried me. But as my eyes scanned the neatly filled-out form, one line made me stop breathing. Under the section for intended major, in Riley's surprisingly precise handwriting, were two words: landscape architecture. I looked from the paper in my hands to the window, to the riot of life and color that was our garden. A project born from grief had become a design for a future. Chloe had asked me to save her daughter. My parents had fought me out of fear. I had fought back out of a sense of duty and a promise. But what we had become had nothing to do with saving or fighting. It was about building. I hadn't lost my perfectly designed life. I had been forced to collaborate on a better one, a design that was richer, messier, and infinitely more beautiful than anything I could have ever conceived of on my own. I had accepted a responsibility I never wanted, only to discover I was building the one thing I never knew I needed: a family, on my own terms, from the ground up.